All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. I'm kind of looking at Twitter and it kind of looks like it's not showing. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it looks like it is showing what it's supposed to. So if you're watching right now, you should be seeing my face and you should be seeing my Nullify Roe little screen share there. Okay, it looks like we are seeing that. Awesome. Um, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know there's a little bit of a countdown left, but just because I didn't want anybody to think something was wrong. Welcome to Nullify Roe, Pro-Life, Pro-Liberty Live. So this is my first time doing a live stream. Hopefully everybody can hear me right. And if you are watching and you want to shout out in the comments, go ahead. I know not everybody can watch live and people watch later, and that's all good. But I wanted to just talk to you guys today. I'm just going to pause that countdown. I want to talk about what nullification is and why it is so crucial when we're talking about Roe v. Wade and abolishing abortion. So let's go ahead and get started. So just welcome to this, and I wanted to kind of show you, this is how you can follow me. I'm probably, if you're watching this, you already follow me on one of these platforms. But if you haven't, if you're like, oh, I didn't know you were on Twitter, or I didn't know you were on Tumblr, go ahead and join in there. And so just some updates real quick. I know 2 days ago, or sorry, yesterday, the Supreme Court had a pretty big ruling or opinion, and we're going to talk about the difference between a ruling and an opinion, on the June Medical Services case in Louisiana. And so this, I'm hoping, really gets people thinking about nullification, and especially as it comes to Roe v. Wade and other issues where the federal government has overstepped their bounds. And I already have heard a couple of conservative pro-life politicians talk about not necessarily using the word nullification, but using the concept that, maybe this is not what the Supreme Court is supposed to be doing, and maybe there's another way. So I just want to kind of show you my understanding from my research and a lot of things that I've been learning lately about the Supreme Court, about the Constitution, about the role of the federal government, and about, some things that I've been wrong on in the past. So if you've watched my videos before, this may contradict some things I've said before. I want people to understand I am pro-life. I believe abortion is wrong, and I believe it kills a preborn child. And I don't want abortion to be legal, where I live or really anywhere else. What I used to think was that we really needed to have a federal ban on abortion, or we needed a constitutional amendment that, gave personhood to all human beings, which, some of that stuff I'm still, maybe, but there's another approach to this that I think is going to be much more effective, and not only more effective as far as saving babies, but also more constitutional. And as a libertarian, I do also want to be constitutional, just because I want something to happen. If the Constitution doesn't allow for it, we, got to find a different way. So I want to talk real quick about the Supreme Court and abortion. So if you followed the abortion issue at all, ever, if you know anything about legalized abortion in the United States, you're going to have heard of Roe v. Wade. And so 1973, we have Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. Not everybody knows about Doe v. Bolton. Some people get kind of confused on this one. And so, Doe v. Bolton was really just an expansion of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade had some limitations, or essentially what Roe v. Wade did was it said states could not, or the government in general, including the states, could not ban abortion or overly limit or restrict abortion prior to a certain time period, and we'll talk about that as well. But it didn't really it didn't give any exceptions to that, or it didn't go into some of the hard cases. And so Doe v. Bolton went into the hard cases and talked about things like rape or life of the mother, which is what we usually hear when we're, if you're a pro-life person talking to pro-choice people, you're going to get those kinds of scenarios all the time. So Doe v. Bolton really addressed those and actually widened what Roe v. Wade had opened the door for. Now, when we talk about Supreme Court opinions, the Supreme Court issues opinions. You hear about the majority opinion or the minority opinion or the dissent. And hello to Magical Dude 17, welcome. But, when we talk about, the Supreme Court opinions, we need to understand how the Supreme Court was really set up in the Constitution and what its actual intent is. And once we understand that, we're going to see that all of these cases that stem from Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton really are not, they all come from kind of a faulty foundation. So then we have Webster versus Reproductive Health Services in 1989. In 1992, we have Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And if you pay attention to abortion in the United States, you probably also heard of this one. And one of the reasons it's such a big deal is even though it challenged some aspects of Roe v. Wade, it overall upheld it as a precedent. And in fact found, even though there were some problems with Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court said, you know what, Roe v. Wade is now precedent and we're not going to challenge it. And we're going to talk about precedent and why that's a problem and the way that precedent is viewed as a problem. But between Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, many people considered abortion to be a settled issue, at least at the judicial level, saying that if the Supreme Court has said this many times or has said in multiple cases that that abortion is a constitutional right or anything like that, well, we're really just not going to be able to challenge it. This is it. We've got it. The problem with that is the Supreme Court has overruled itself many times, and there's many times where we've been very happy to see it overruled. You look at the Dred Scott case, and I know people don't like me to bring up the Dred Scott case when I'm talking about abortion, but I bring it up as an example of a time where the Supreme Court was very, very, very wrong and then overruled itself, thankfully. And actually, when you look at what led up to the Supreme Court overturning its decision in Dred Scott, then you actually kind of see the groundwork of nullification in there. So we'll look at that and kind of compare those strategies. Then you've got Stenberg versus Carhart and Gonzalez versus Carhart. I put a little asterisk there because that was really about a federal law. And so my key point here is that the Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction over state laws that only affect the state, the individual state. So this was a federal law. So the Supreme Court did have jurisdiction here. I still think their decision was wrong. They had jurisdiction. Stenberg versus Carhart was a state law, and it led into Gonzalez versus Carhart. And then 2016, this is where we really, I get real riled up. Holloman's Health versus Hellerstedt was the Texas admitting privileges ambulatory surgical center, case. And so, Holloman's Health versus Hellerstedt, the Supreme Court said that those restrictions would pose an undue burden on on a woman's right to have an abortion that they claim exists. And, back up here in Roe v. Wade we don't have that undue burden clause. That's actually here from Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So they're actually, in 2016, they're citing both Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe v. Wade and multiple other cases in their decision. Now, what's interesting is in 2016, you have Chief Justice John Roberts in the dissent. He disagreed. He voted against it. He thought that the Texas law should stand. He thought it was a good law. So then in 2020, just yesterday, we have June Medical Services versus Russo, which is the Louisiana version of the Texas law. And so that case, it's almost identical. And yet Chief Justice John Roberts, who had, been okay with that law in 2016, now wasn't because of precedent. So when we talk about this, we are saying, the Supreme Court never really should have been involved in any of these cases except for maybe 2007 right here, because these were all state laws. These were all state restrictions on abortion that the Supreme Court is not supposed to be dealing with. And we'll talk about what the Supreme Court is actually supposed to deal with in a second here. I got a couple of questions in the chat and I want to look at those. Are hygiene laws undue burden on restaurants? No, that's a great point. So, we have hygiene regulations, we have safety regulations on all forms of businesses, nail salons, restaurants, medical clinics, just about any business that you run that serves customers, there are medical restrictions. And you may say, or there's safety restrictions, and you may say, maybe there shouldn't be so many restrictions. And I can understand that. But my problem is when you say, well, this type of medical clinic, has to follow these guidelines, and this one doesn't. And that's what we're looking at with both the Texas and Louisiana cases, is that they're both acting as ambulatory surgical centers in the sense that they're doing outpatient surgical procedures in a non-hospital setting. So they should have to follow the same regulations that ambulatory surgical centers follow. Now, if you want to reduce the regulations for ambulatory surgical centers, okay. But you shouldn't be picking and choosing. You shouldn't be cherry picking, well, this ambulatory surgical center has to follow these rules and this one doesn't. So that's the issue that we run into there. But regardless of whether they're an undue burden or not, the entire foundation of the undue burden is a problem, and the whole idea of the Supreme Court ruling on these cases is a problem. So we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and what the Constitution actually says about it. And I actually have my little Constitution right here. So I'm going to turn to page 31 in my little booklet. We're looking at Article 3, and you can see it on the screen. But essentially what it does, Article 3, Section 2 says what kinds of cases the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court is supposed to handle. And if you look on the screen, you have some kind of overall, admiralty, maritime jurisdiction. You have, just some of these kinds of federal level things regarding the military, things regarding ambassadors and public ministers and things that are kind of foreign affairs kind of things, right? Then you have down here, these are also the things where the United States is a party, where the United States is suing somebody or being sued, then you might have the Supreme Court. But then we have down here controversies between two or more states. So that's two or more states that are conflicting with each other, maybe over a border dispute, maybe, somebody's doing something in, North Dakota that's affecting something in South Dakota, and South Dakota says, hey, wait a second, I have a problem with that. Then you have between citizens of different states. So if somebody from Oklahoma does something to me and I sue them and, goes through all the appeals courts and all of that, it can get up to the level of the Supreme Court because we're from two different states. Also between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states. Okay, so this is citizens of the same state, but we're claiming something in another state. So again, there's two states involved. And then we have between a state or the citizens of that state and foreign state citizens or subjects. So again, the Supreme Court can get involved when it's a state and another state, a state and somebody else, somebody who lives in another state, or a state and something from another country. But there's nowhere in here that says that the Supreme Court can get involved when it's one state's laws. It's that state that has, they've passed their law and it is in accordance with their state constitution. So every state has a constitution, right? And that's the key. So it's not just, states can do whatever they want. No, states have constitutions. Those constitutions are essentially agreements from the people of that state saying, these are the things we want our government to be able to do. Those constitutions can be amended if you go through the amendment process defined in that state's constitution. They can be changed. They can be completely rewritten if you follow the processes. But to say that the Supreme Court is going to come in and adjudicate matters that belong to a state, that belong to that state's constitution, and do so based on the U.S. Constitution, that is where we really, really have a problem. So the U.S. Constitution applies to the federal government. It is restrictions on the federal government's power and essentially a list of things that the federal government can do. And so to get into state issues where it's one state doing their own thing, we really have an issue there. So the other question, even, you got the Constitution, yes, and we can talk about whether it's constitutional or not all day long. We can talk about the Supremacy Clause, and we can talk about incorporation doctrine and all these kinds of things. But as, if you're somebody who understands that government, power corrupts, government can't always be trusted, should we really trust the federal government to limit itself? And that really is what it comes down to. Because every time that we wait with bated breath for a Supreme Court decision and we hope it's in our favor, we're saying that the government has to limit itself, right? And wait a second, why would they do that? And there's a few cases where it does, but they're very few and far between, and they're usually on things that, they're like, okay, we can let that little bit of power go as long as we can keep this power over here. And so, the Founding Fathers never intended for us to trust the federal government to keep itself in check, right? And they definitely did not intend for the Supreme Court to keep states in check. That was never the intention. In fact, the Constitution never would have been ratified if that had been the case, because if you look at the documents of the Founding Fathers and the framers of the Constitution, they are very, very clear that the only way that this Constitution gets ratified is if the states are a check on the federal government and not the other way around. Because the states, or the 13 colonies, they were very, very concerned about instituting a new federal government, a new national government that was going to have control over them. And they said, okay, we're only doing that under the conditions that we can essentially keep the federal government in check, and that it's very limited, and that there are mechanisms for stopping it when it gets out of control. And so we'll talk about those mechanisms. But we're going to talk about nullification as one of those mechanisms. And James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and other Founding Fathers all talked about nullification. Madison gives us some really good information. And so I've got a link here if you want to go open that in another tab or whatever, or even just remember it or write it down to look up later. And it's bit.ly/Madison 4 steps. And it'll take you to the 10th Amendment Center, which I really appreciate. I've learned a lot from them. They have a lot of great resources on nullification. So I'm essentially taking a lot of what they have said and what they have done, and I really want to translate it into the pro-life movement and say, okay, here's how the pro-life movement can use these things that are being used on other issues already. Here's how we can use this for what we're trying to accomplish, which really, it's good. We're, instead of waiting for the federal government to overturn Roe v. Wade, we can actually nullify, or basically make void, make null, make, useless the Roe v. Wade decision ourselves. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court. We don't have to wait for a constitutional convention, right? We don't have to just chip away and chip away and chip away. We're going to do some chipping away. We're going to be gaining ground by inches to get to where we want to go, but we don't have to be so slow about it, and we don't have to wait for the government to give us permission to save babies. So we're going to nullify Roe v. Wade. And so this is how that works. First of all, we're and this is kind of related to Madison's 4 steps. So if you read those, you'll kind of understand where I'm going here. But basically what we want to happen is we want state legislatures to either pass abortion restrictions according to their state constitutions, or some of them already have, stuff that's already in place. So we'll talk about that. But then we have state level courts that are basing their decisions on these laws on the state constitution, not federal precedent, not the federal constitution, but the state constitution, because it's a state law. State law, state constitution, right? State law, state constitution. Because here's the thing. You say, well, what about the Bill of Rights? Okay. Bill of Rights is for the federal government. The federal government, Congress may not pass a law that abridges freedom of speech or free exercise of a religion. Okay. Congress shall not pass a law that infringes on our right to bear arms. Congress shall not pass a law that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's Congress. That's the federal government. Every state constitution has a similar list of rights or a similar list of things the federal or the state government cannot do. So Texas Constitution, our Constitution lists the right to life. It lists the right to bear arms. It lists all these things. They're in there. So when we look at a state law, we shouldn't be comparing it up against the Bill of Rights. We should be comparing it against the state constitution and all the state constitutions have very, very similar lists of rights. And so if you're concerned that your right to freedom of religion would go away under the nullification system, no, because your state constitution has those rights in it. So go read your state constitution, please, and understand what it says. But then we can have governors execute laws that are passed by the state legislature, and we don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to tell us we can. So your governor really can stand up and say that we passed this law, we're going to execute it, we're not going to wait on that. And I've got a quick question here. Can states just use their existing homicide laws to protect the unborn? And that's from Man from Milwaukee. Thank you. No, you're absolutely right. We can use we can definitely use state homicide laws. In fact, so I was just looking at the Texas Code of Laws. So Texas Code of Laws has a homicide law that has an exception in it for preborn babies who are killed by abortion. So my strategy for Texas, what I would like to see Texas do, is simply remove that exception from the homicide law, and that would abolish abortion. If we don't make exceptions, and that's the thing, is most states right now do have those exceptions in their homicide laws because of Roe v. Wade. So because of Roe v. Wade, they went in and added those exceptions. So if those are taken out, then yes, we can use those homicide laws. But that can be part of the nullification plan. And I'll talk about that every state is going to have their own strategy, depending on your state's constitution, your existing laws, and how pro-life friendly your state is. So a state like California or New Mexico is going to have a different approach than a state like Texas or Georgia or Mississippi. So I'll get to that in a minute. But so we have multiple states working together. That's our goal. Let's say you could get Louisiana and Texas and Georgia and Mississippi. You get all these pro-life states that already have pro-life laws and have pro-life legislatures and pro-life governors to work together so that it's not just Texas standing by itself saying, hey, Supreme Court, stay in your lane. It's multiple states working together. And then we can have Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, and all subsequent SCOTUS abortion decisions nullified. So if we get enough states to say, you know what, we're not listening to that anymore, what's the federal government going to do? Now, you could bring up the Civil War or the other times where the federal government has cracked down on states. But here's the thing, does the federal government want that? I don't think so. So, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be just like, all right, we stand up and we say our piece and then the federal government backs down. No, they're going to fight us. But if we don't push back on this, they'll just keep taking power and they'll keep making decisions on abortion, which is not a federal government issue. And here I want to go real quick into, because I know some of y'all are probably thinking, well, but don't you want a federal abortion ban? Don't you want the federal government to legislate on abortion? At this point, really no, because I've been doing some research and I used to think, well, yeah, I want an abortion ban because I want federal homicide laws to include preborn babies. However, the federal government isn't really supposed to have laws about homicide. There's 3 things that the federal government is supposed to have laws about, or to make, kind of legal, criminal justice decisions about. And that is treason, counterfeiting, and piracy. Homicide's not in there, like none of those other federal crimes are in there. So if we could get the federal government to back off on some of these things, that might, I think that would be a different story. And I'd much rather see states step up and start making their own regulations. The other benefit of this system is that states that are not quite ready to full-on ban abortion, they can at least start making restrictions, because most Americans, even those who call themselves pro-choice, want at least some regulation, some restriction on abortion. Very few people want no restrictions whatsoever. In fact, most people want to restrict late-term abortion or want health and safety standards like the Texas and Louisiana laws that were struck down. So I really think the state level approach is actually going to both, soften some of the resistance, where you're not going to have such hard resistance because we're not trying to dictate to all the states at the same time. But also it's going to give pro-lifers in the individual states a little more voice, a little more power to advocate for the preborn in their state. So here's what you can do. And so this is the part I really want you guys to, especially those of you who are watching live, like, thank you so much for being here. I really would love to see you guys speak up and start spreading this around. And whether you spread my video or whether you go to some of the resources I'm about to share with you and spread some of that around, whatever way you do it, or you just explain it to people based on your own knowledge of the Constitution and federalism and nullification and all those things, that it's really important that we start educating ourselves. And I'm in the process of educating myself. I'm not going to say that I know everything or have answers to every question. I still have people that I go to when I don't know the answer, and I'm going to go talk to them and ask them what they think and do my own research. But educate yourself, educate people around you, your friends, family, and coworkers if you dare, depending on your coworkers. Especially if you have like-minded people or people you know who are libertarian or independent or don't like big government. This is a great kind of common ground to build with them. And then also, of course, your representatives. And so your representatives may or may not understand nullification. They may have an incorrect idea of the Supreme Court and the Constitution. And so it's really good if you can help them understand what nullification is and how it can be used to end abortion, especially if you have good pro-life representatives. Because I bet you a lot of them, I know there's a lot of people out there in our state legislatures who are good, solid pro-life people who want to end abortion, who legitimately, genuinely want to end abortion. And I bet they would be excited to find out there's a way to do it if they don't already know. And so a couple of resources that you can use to educate yourself and others. The 10th Amendment Center is a really great one, and they have a series called Path to Liberty. And so that's that first URL on the screen there. And they post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For the most part, once in a while they skip a day, but generally every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And they talk about nullification. They talk about federal overreach. So it's not always going to be about pro-life stuff. In fact, it usually isn't. But you can apply the things you learn from those videos to the Roe v. Wade issue, to the abortion issue, and learn about what states are doing and have done in the past to nullify unconstitutional federal laws or federal policies. You can look at your state's constitution. I really recommend that you do that. Look at your state's Bill of Rights. Does your state guarantee the right to life? Because that's a great place to start. Just getting your state legislature to confirm that preborn, humans are part of that group that gets the right to life, that goes a long way. Especially if they understand that overrides Roe v. Wade. And then the United States Constitution, you need to know what the enumerated powers that the federal government has are, because the federal government doesn't just get whatever powers Congress says it does. Congress can't just pass laws and say, oh, now we have this power. There are very few defined enumerated powers, and once you understand what those are, you're going to see just how many things the federal government is doing that it shouldn't be, that should be left to the states, right? And so when we talk about nullification, a great example is marijuana. And whatever you think about marijuana personally, or whether you think it should be legal or not, the federal government should not be in charge of it. But the federal government has a law that dictates whether or not you can grow marijuana, whether or not you can possess it, whether or not you can sell it. And so some states have just gone ahead and legalized marijuana, even though there's a federal law that says they can't. And so far, they haven't been challenged as much as pro-life states are when they pass abortion restrictions, but I would watch that. Even if you don't support marijuana and you don't want it to be illegal, I would really watch carefully what they're doing, because it's very similar to what we're going to be doing, except instead of legalizing marijuana, we're going to be applying the homicide laws equally to all people and protecting all people under those laws. That's essentially where we want to go from here. So watching them do that and watching how they're passing these laws and what the federal government's responses are is really important. And so then there's a couple more things I want to show you guys. When you're talking to your local pro-life legislative organization. So every state has at least a right to life. So we have Texas right to life, you have Montana right to life, that sort of thing. We also have, in Texas, we also have Texas Alliance for Life, and we have other pro-life legislative groups, lobbying groups. So any organization you have in your state that lobbies for pro-life legislation, who helps elect pro-life legislators or pro-life representatives, if you have any of those groups in your state, they would be a great one to connect with. And I would even recommend, before you even bring this kind of stuff up to them, like volunteer with them, show some support and say, hey, I really love what you guys are doing. And then kind of say, hey, you know what? I've been doing this research, and what if we did this? And so, when you're talking to those groups, they've been in the legislature, they've been talking to legislators, they've been talking to the governor, they've been working so hard to try and get pro-life laws passed, and they get so frustrated when those laws get struck down by courts. And I know that our local, Texas pro-life legislative organizations, that they have that experience because they helped pass the Texas admitting privileges law that was, that the Supreme Court said no to in 2016. And so talking to them about, hey, the courts constantly fail us. The courts constantly rule against us. They're constantly holding us back. We really cannot expect them to all of a sudden start supporting us. If we just write a good enough bill, it'll get through. We know that that's not the case. We can't think that way anymore. We can't just say, oh, well, the next time, or, oh, the next Supreme Court justice that Trump appoints, that'll turn the tide. The tide was already supposed to be turned for the Louisiana case. We were already supposed to have a majority, and we didn't. So waiting for this, magical moment when the courts finally recognize the right to life, I just don't think is the strategy. And so just pointing at that long history of the courts failing us, pointing out the fact that the Supreme Court doesn't have jurisdiction over state laws, and especially state laws that affect that state and don't affect other states. Other states can do what they want. We're going to do this. And then explain nullification and explain Madison's 4 steps. So if you go back to that bit.ly/Madison 4 steps, that should help you kind of explain that to them and research that a little bit more. And the other resources I'm going to show you are going to explain that in more detail as well. But essentially what our path to nullification is for Roe v. Wade. And then ask them to help you advocate with legislators and your governor to nullify Roe. Because they have the contacts, they have the rapport, they have the relationship that you don't with those legislators. Now you can go on your own and talk to your representatives, talk to your governor, talk to all those people. And that's awesome, and you should. But when you talk to your pro-life legislative organization, if you can get them on board, they have a lot more amplification than you do. They can amplify voices at a level that you can't by yourself. So it's really cool if you can get them on your side, if you can get them say, hey, like, what if we try this? What if we push for this? What if we work with other states? All of that. And we can kind of get voices heard and really get the government to pay attention. They're not going to like what they hear, but we need them to pay attention, right? We need them to stop ignoring us. So I'm now introducing the official #NullifyRoe website. So it doesn't have a custom domain name yet. It is a Google site, but it's kind of our start for this idea of nullifying Roe. So if you go to bit.ly/nullifyRoe, and I'll leave this up for a minute and just talk about what's on that website. So I'm putting it together. It's not, there's more stuff that's going to be up there in the coming days. It's not finished yet. It's ready to the extent that, you can start using it for resources and maybe directing people to it to learn more. But I'm going to be adding more content to it in the coming days. And I'm especially going to be adding social media graphics that you can share. So bit.ly/nullifyRoe. I'll give you a second. If you want to write that down, you can always come back to this video later too if you didn't see it. But I'm going to go ahead and show you the website. So this is the homepage that you go to if you do bit.ly/nullifyRoe, or it's a Google site, sites.google.com. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera to ko-fi.com pro-liberty, and that's coffee. So you might see other people, other blogs use this, and you're supposed to buy somebody a coffee, and that's kind of the idea. And so it's supposed to be small donations just to support a content creator that you like. So if you like what I'm doing, I would really appreciate it. A few people have done it, and it's really been awesome when that happens. It really just makes me feel like my work is appreciated. And I also just appreciate your comments and the fact that you guys are here asking questions. I really love that. And then also, if you look at the bottom of my screen here, if I were to do a custom domain name for the Nullify Roe website, it would cost me about $12 a year. I've shopped around, and that seems to be the best price. Some websites have lower prices for that domain, but then it goes higher the next year. So I don't want to pay $8 this year and then $20 next year. But if I were to get a custom domain, I would need some help with that. I can only do so much out of my own pocket. So if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, I'd really love to see that have a custom domain name, and it would be nullifyroe.org, if we did it. So if you really like that idea and you've got $12 to spare, or you've got $6 to spare and someone else has $6, and you want to go to ko-fi.com/ProLife for Liberty and chip that in, I would really appreciate it, and then I'd be able to do that. So I at least need to be able to cover this year for me to go ahead and take that step and register that domain. So thank you so much. Anybody have any other questions in the chat before I head out? Otherwise, if you have other questions, you can find me on Tumblr or on Twitter. If you follow me on Tumblr, you know that I answer lots of questions all the time. People ask me lots of questions. My inbox does get a little full sometimes, so sometimes I miss something. So I apologize if you've asked me a question on Tumblr and I've missed it. But you can feel free to send more questions, and I'll keep answering things as I have time. You can ask questions in the YouTube comments or on Twitter, whatever works for you. Again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to those who are watching later who weren't able to join us live. I really appreciate that you came and checked in and learned a little bit, hopefully. Hopefully you learned something. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys again.